He didn't even look back. My son-in-law held the door open like he was doing me a favor, and my daughter stood by the car with her arms crossed, checking her phone. Not her mother's face. Her phone. I remember thinking, she used to hold my hand when she was little. She used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long drives, and now she couldn't be bothered to walk me inside. The woman at the front desk smiled at me the way people smile at children who are crying over something they consider small. "You're going to love it here," she said. "We have bingo on Tuesdays." I was 71 years old. I had taught third grade for 28 years. I had raised 2 children, buried a husband, and repainted my own kitchen twice. And now someone was telling me about bingo on Tuesdays like that was supposed to be enough. I didn't say any of this. I smiled back. I'd always been good at smiling back. It had started, as so many things do, with paperwork. My daughter, her name is Renata, though she goes by Rena now, which she started doing in college and never stopped, had come to visit me 3 months earlier with a stack of folders and what I can only describe as a rehearsed face, the face of someone who has practiced what they're going to say in the car on the way over. My son-in-law Garrett sat at my kitchen table and didn't touch the coffee I'd made. He had a way of filling a room without contributing to it. "Mom," Rena said, and I already didn't like how she said it. "Too soft, too careful. We've been talking, and we're worried about you." I was fine. I had a small dizzy spell in February, which I had already told my doctor about, and my doctor had already adjusted my blood pressure medication, and everything was fine. But that dizzy spell had become, in my daughter's telling, a fall, and then the fall had become a pattern, and the pattern had become evidence of a decline I did not recognize in myself. "The house is too big for one person," Garrett said. He said it like he was stating the weather. My house was 1,400 square feet. I had lived there for 31 years. My husband and I had painted the front porch together the summer before he died, and I still had the paint on my left thumbnail where I'd missed a spot and laughed about it and never quite scrubbed it all off. That house was not too big. That house was exactly the right size for the life I had built inside it. But I listened, because that is what I had always done. I listened and I nodded and I said, "Let me think about it." What I didn't know then, what I should have asked about, what I should have had a lawyer look at, was the second folder, the one Garrett slid across the table almost as an afterthought. "Since we're here," he said, "we thought you might as well sign this too. Just a power of attorney. Standard stuff. It just means we can handle things if something ever happens and you're not able to. If something ever happens." I signed it. I was sitting at my own kitchen table in the house I had owned for 31 years, and I signed a piece of paper because my daughter looked at me with her father's eyes, and I have never in my life been able to say no to her father's eyes. The facility was called Meadow Glen. It sounded like a subdivision. It looked like one too. Low beige buildings with cheerful trim and a parking lot full of compact cars that belonged to people who were there by choice, who could leave whenever they wanted. The residents did not have compact cars in the parking lot. The residents had rooms with their names on small plaques beside the doors, like hotel guests who had forgotten they were supposed to check out. My room had a window that faced a courtyard with a fountain that made a sound like a faucet left running. I lay awake the first night listening to it. I thought about my bedroom at home, where I could hear the oak tree branch scratch against the window when the wind came from the north. I had found that sound annoying for 30 years. I would have given anything to hear it that night. I met my neighbor across the hall in the first week. Her name was Opal, and she was 83 and sharp as anything, and she had been there for 2 years because her son lived in Phoenix and found the logistics of her inconvenient. She brought me a crossword puzzle book on my 3rd day and said, "Don't let them see you cry." Not because of them. Because crying makes your eyes puffy, and then they think something's wrong with you medically, and then there are forms. Opal understood forms. I asked her once, in those first weeks, what recourse there was. What a person could do when they were perfectly capable, perfectly lucid, and their family had simply decided otherwise. She was quiet for a moment. You need someone on the outside, she said. That's the whole thing. You need one person who isn't them. I thought about who that might be. My closest friend, May, lived 40 minutes away and didn't drive anymore. My sister was in Tucson and we hadn't spoken properly in 6 years, over something I now considered absurd. My neighbor back home, an older man named Harlan, was kind but not the type to wade into family business. I had been, I realized, gradually surrounded by a life that had narrowed without my noticing. Like a room where the furniture had been slowly rearranged, and you didn't notice until you couldn't find the door. Rena called every Sunday, always at 2 o'clock, always for exactly 11 minutes, which I know because I started counting. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I'd made friends, whether the food was good. She did not ask whether I was happy. She did not ask whether I was happy. She did not ask whether I wanted to come home. She had stopped asking things whose answers might require her to act. Garrett never called. What Garrett did, I learned 3 weeks into my stay, was visit my house. One of the other residents, a woman named Bertina who had family in my neighborhood, mentioned it casually. Her daughter had seen an unfamiliar car in my driveway twice, a silver SUV. Garrett drove a silver SUV. I asked Rena about it on our 11-minute Sunday call. She said he was just checking on things, making sure the pipes were okay, that the gutters weren't full. Routine maintenance. I said, that's very thoughtful of him. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was that I had not asked anyone to check on my pipes. The fog of those first weeks is something I have a hard time explaining. It wasn't sadness exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was more like displacement, the feeling of being an object that has been moved from one shelf to another by someone who didn't ask. I went to the group activities because the alternative was sitting in my room listening to the fountain, and I smiled at the nurses because they were kind and were doing their jobs, and I ate the food, which was fine, which was perfectly adequate, which was exactly like everything else there, fine and adequate and chosen for me. But underneath that fog, something was slowly starting to harden. It happened because of a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. The facility had a small sitting room near the entrance, where families sometimes met with staff. The door was usually closed. One afternoon, it was not fully closed, and I was walking past and I heard Garrett's voice, unmistakably Garrett's voice. That flat, confident tone he used when he was talking about property, saying something about comparable sales in my zip code. I stopped. I stood in the hallway outside that room and I heard my son-in-law discussing the market value of my house with someone on the phone. I heard him say the words spring listing. I heard him say we could net easily. I heard him say she's settled. She's not going to give us any trouble. She's settled. I walked back to my room very carefully, the way you walk when you're trying not to fall. I sat down on the edge of my bed. The fountain was running outside my window. I looked at my hands in my lap. I thought, he has power of attorney. I signed it. He can sell my house. And then I thought something else, something quieter and colder and more important. I thought, but I also have a lawyer. I had used an attorney, Mentor OC. His firm was on a card in my address book from when he'd handled my husband's estate 8 years ago. I had no phone in my room. This was not an accident, I had come to understand. But the facility had a phone in the common room, and the common room was open until 9, and the staff at the evening desk was a young man named Terrence, who read novels on his shift and respected people's privacy. I called Mr. Osei's office on a Thursday evening. I got his voicemail. I said my name, I said I believed my financial interests were at risk, and I left the number of the common room and said I would be there between 7 and 8 every weekday evening until I heard from him. He called back the following Monday. I remember standing at that phone with my back to the room, speaking very quietly, and Mr. Osei listening, asking precise questions, writing things down. He asked if I had a copy of what I had signed. I didn't. He said that was all right, he could pull it. He asked if I was under any medical or legal restriction. I said no. He said, then you have more options than you may realize. I held on to that sentence like something solid. What happened next took 11 weeks. I want to be honest about that because when I tell this story, it can sound sudden. Like one moment I was trapped, and the next I was free. It was not like that. It was slow and careful, and sometimes frightening. Mr. Osei reviewed the power of attorney I had signed. It was durable, which meant it covered financial decisions. But it had been drawn up by Garrett's family attorney, not mine. And it had a provision that Mr. Osei flagged immediately. It was not, as Garrett had told me, standard. It had been written broadly enough to allow the sale of real property, my house, without my additional consent. But there was something else, something Garrett had not anticipated because he had not thought I was paying that kind of attention to my own life. 4 years earlier, I had opened a separate savings account. Not hidden exactly, just separate, just mine. A habit I'd started after a financial workshop at my church where the advisor said every woman should have one account that is only hers. I had put money in it slowly, over time. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to pay Mr. O.C., enough to cover the retainer, enough to matter. Mr. Osei filed a motion to revoke the power of attorney on the grounds that I had been of sound mind when I signed it and remained of sound mind now, and that the document had been presented to me under misleading pretenses. He requested a competency evaluation, which he was confident I would pass. I did pass. The evaluator, a clinical psychologist, spent 90 minutes with me and wrote in her report that I demonstrated intact cognitive functioning, clear long-term and short-term memory, and appropriate judgment. Intact. I had always been intact. Garrett's attorney pushed back. There was a period of letters and filings and 2 very tense phone calls that Mr. Osei handled while I sat in the common room pretending to do my crossword with Opal and trying to keep my heart rate down. Rena called me during this time. Still on Sundays, still 11 minutes, and her voice had changed. Tighter, like she was listening for something in mine. I gave her nothing. I had spent a lifetime being readable by the people I loved, and I was done with that now. The power of attorney was revoked on a Wednesday in October. Mr. Osei called me in the evening. It's done, he said. The document is no longer valid. You retain full legal authority over your assets and your property. I said, and the house? The listing was pulled this morning, he said. They had not yet accepted any offers. I sat with that for a moment. My house was still mine. My front porch, still mine. My oak tree, the one that scraped the window in the north wind, still mine. I told Opal that evening. She put her crossword book down and looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Well, good for you." And the way she said it, not loud, not dramatic, just certain, was the finest compliment I had received in years. I left Meadow Glen on the first Saturday of November. The morning was cold and clear. I had one suitcase and a tote bag with my crossword books and the photograph of my husband I'd kept on the nightstand, and I had arranged for May's son, a reliable young man who owed me nothing but had always been kind, to drive me home. I did not tell Rena I was leaving. I called her from my house 2 hours after I arrived. She was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Mom, we were just trying to." "I know what you were trying to do," I said. And I meant it. I did know. I knew she had convinced herself it was for my benefit. I knew she had let Garrett handle the part she didn't want to look at too closely. I knew she had taken the easier story. Mom is declining, mom can't manage, this is the right thing, and wrapped herself in it so she didn't have to feel what she was actually doing. I understood all of that. I was not ready to forgive it yet, but I understood it. "I want you to know," I said, "that I am home. I am fine. I have spoken to an attorney and my affairs are in order. If you'd like to talk, really talk, not the 11-minute Sunday calls, I would like that too. But I'm not going to pretend the last few months didn't happen. I'm not going to do that." She started to cry. I listened to her cry for a little while. Then I said goodbye, gently, and I hung up. I spent the rest of that afternoon in the backyard. The garden had gone to pieces while I was away. Weeds in the vegetable bed, the rose bush untied, leaves everywhere that should have been raked in September. I stood there looking at it and I didn't feel despair. I felt something else. Purpose, maybe. The particular satisfaction of a problem that is yours to fix. I went inside and got my gloves and my kneeling pad. The soil was hard but not frozen yet. I pulled weeds until the light went flat and my knees ached, and there were 2 full paper bags waiting by the fence. The oak tree branch scraped against the bedroom window that night. I lay there listening to it, and I thought about Opal, still at Meadow Glen, still waiting for that one person on the outside. I thought about the other women I'd met there, women with good minds and difficult families and no crossword puzzles left. I thought about what I would do differently, what I would tell my granddaughter someday when she was old enough to hear it. Never sign anything you haven't read. Always keep one account that is only yours. Know the name of a good attorney before you need one. I know this. Being older does not mean being finished. It does not mean being movable. It does not mean you have to go quietly. I did not go quietly. The oak branch knocked against the glass the same way it had for 30 years, and I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in months. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what I actually want to say. Not the polished version. Not the version that sounds wise from the start. The real version. The one where I admit that I saw the signs and smiled anyway, that I handed over a piece of paper at my own kitchen table because I didn't want to be the kind of mother who made things difficult. That's the part I have to live with. Not what they did, what I did. And here's what I've come to understand about that. The choices we make from fear, the signatures, the silences, the 11-minute phone calls I accepted without pushing back, they don't protect us. They just delay the cost. Garrett didn't take advantage of a weak woman. He took advantage of a woman who had spent a lifetime believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. It isn't. Goodness without judgment is just compliance with a softer name. What saved me wasn't luck. It wasn't even Mr. Osei, though I will be grateful to that man for the rest of my life. What saved me was a decision I had made 4 years earlier, quietly, at a church financial workshop on a Tuesday night when I almost didn't go because it was raining. I kept one account that was only mine. I wrote down the name of an attorney and put it in my address book. Small things. Practical things. Things I did not do out of suspicion. I did them out of something I can only call clarity. A moment of understanding that a woman should always know where she stands, financially, legally, in her own life. That's not cynicism, that's intelligence applied with care. And I think there's something deeply right about that, about knowing the fine print, asking the uncomfortable question, refusing to let love or guilt or the desire to be agreeable stand between you and your own clear thinking. Rena is my daughter. I love her. And I also know now that love without discernment can be used against you by the people standing closest to it. Opal told me once, in that matter-of-fact way she had, that the whole thing comes down to whether you have one person on the outside. I think she was right, but I'd add something to that now. You also have to be willing to be that person for yourself. To pick up the phone in the common room when Terrence is reading his novel and the fountain is running outside, and everything in you wants to just be quiet and wait for someone else to fix it. You have to be willing to be difficult. To be, in someone's disappointed words, trouble. I went back to my garden that November afternoon, not because everything was resolved. Rena and I still have a long way to go, but because the work was there and it was mine and I was capable of doing it. That's the thing about getting older that nobody tells you clearly enough. Your capability doesn't disappear. It just gets tested in ways it wasn't when you were young. The test isn't physical. It's whether you still believe down in the place where it counts, that you are worth the fight. I do. I know that now in a way I didn't before any of this happened. And if there is a single thing I want someone to take from my story, it's that you are worth the fight. Know your documents. Know your accounts. Know one good attorney's name. And when someone tells you to just sign it, it's just a formality. That is precisely the moment to slow down and read every word.